Hey everybody, Jamin here from Game Show. So a company I've spent a lot of time focusing on, and I've talked a lot about in the past, is a company called Riot Games. They make a very popular title called League of Legends, and they've been rolling out what's called a player reform system that ostensibly will put an end to hateful, abusive language during games of League of Legends, and uses a very sophisticated and far-reaching artificial intelligence system. The fellow who's heading up the project is this fellow named Jeffrey Lin, who's the lead social systems designer at Riot. Actually had the chance to speak with him a couple years ago at Killscreen's 256 conference, who's great. We talked about online communities, and one of his big projects has been stemming from his work at the University of Washington, is trying to figure out a way that at a high level, Riot Games can do something about the way that players ostensibly treat each other. And you see similar sorts of efforts in other sports, for example. There's like unsportsmanlike conduct in professional football. There's obviously the card system in soccer. So there are these other tools that other sports have established in terms of trying to create ways to encourage better behavior. So we've talked about, I did a previous episode about things that Riot has done in the past, such as their tribunal system, where the community acts as a jury for bad behavior. But part of the problem was that the process is a little bit slow, and it isn't always successful. Obviously, it's a work in progress, but Riot's made some great strides that I want to talk about right now. So the way that most communities are policed is usually by a team of people who identify really toxic negative behavior by hand. Riot's system is super interesting because it's automated, with the system doling out punishment within 15 minutes of a submitted complaint, which is pretty cool. This may seem bad for some of you because you could ostensibly be banned by a dumb machine, but the system actually learns what's acceptable from the community. So here's the way it works. It's when a player submits a positive and negative feedback for other players after the game, the program incorporates this information, both forms of information, both positive and negative, into how it forms decisions. So it's a machine learning and artificial intelligence system that's built entirely on community standards. So as Jeff Lin, the fellow that I mentioned earlier, has talked about, and he gave this amazing talk at the Game Developers Conference, which I'll link to in the description, he says that the system is very context specific. So it knows the difference between saying, "Oh crap, I'm sorry," and saying, "You're a total piece of crap." So it's not just flagging the word crap, it's actually something that learns how the context of each individual word is used. It also has learned slang from different cultures. So it knows game-specific lingo for League of Legends, for example, using the term bronze trash, for example. And importantly, it can distinguish between positive and negative behavior. So this isn't just a lot of feedback systems are kind of this thumbs up, thumbs down approach, where you can sort of like flag behavior for being offensive or whatever it might be, as opposed to creating an automated system which will give better tools to people to allow them to make good decisions about which players are actually behaving really well, and which players aren't behaving quite so well. It's pretty cool that Riot's doing this. The big reason I'm interested in this subject is because systems like this could go a long way towards making the internet in general a nicer place to be. There are very few companies, obviously, that are dealing with the scale of users like Riot is, but it's very rare that you see such a public demonstration or a willingness to say, hey, we have negative behavior in our community and we want to deploy all the resources that we normally would towards like core product issues, as it were, towards fixing this specific issue. It's like if you ran a bar and the patrons were really nasty to each other, you could say, well, they'll sort it out, or they'll figure things out on their own, or you could try to create systems that would encourage people to be nicer to each other. Twitter, for example, which has been obviously under fire for quite some time for negative behavior, their CEO, Dick Costolo, recently has said in a leaked memo that they suck at dealing with abuse and trolls on the platform, and they've sucked at it for years, and it's no secret that the rest of the world knows about it. And he said that they're losing core user after core user by not addressing simple trolling issues that people face every single day. That's exactly the reason why Riot has invested so much in this process, because they know in the long term, if you create an environment of really nasty, hateful people, eventually people get tired of it and they move on to somewhere else. So in Twitter, it's interesting. In Twitter's case, it's been a real sticking point for the company, in that you have a lot of high-profile people who've been dealing with some of these issues. Louis C.K., for example, recently had said that he quit Twitter. You hear about it from time to time. Patton Oswalt, for example, the comedian, has stepped away from Twitter for a time. Zelda Williams, after her father, Robin Williams, passed away, again, facing the same kind of abuse online. And Twitter hadn't created systems that would allow for people to feel protected. So it's really encouraging that Riot is doing stuff like this. So I'd be curious to know what you all think, whether you are seeing any of these, whether any of Riot's social systems experiments have yielded better behavior for you while you're playing League of Legends, and if you think these kinds of ideas maybe could work in other places. Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you all next week.